In a quiet town in the heart of New York, an old house on the hill drew curious glances. It was said to have been abandoned for years, but no one truly knew what had happened to its previous inhabitants. The house, with its broken windows and weathered walls, radiated an air of mystery and became the subject of whispers around the town. Even with its decaying appearance, something about it seemed to remain untouched, as though it still hid something secret within. In the town, there was no child who hadn't heard the legends about the house, stories of spirits and inexplicable sounds at night. But like all legends, no one believed them. Or did they? For many years, the older residents warned the young ones to stay away from that house. "It's not a place to play," they would say in a grave voice. But curiosity had always been stronger. It was natural for children and teenagers to want to explore the unknown, especially when something seemed forbidden or taboo. The house seemed to call out, as though waiting for the visit of those who dared to enter. The stories passed down from generation to generation only fueled the mystery surrounding it, and one hot summer afternoon, the inevitable happened. A group of young friends, with the audacity of those who fear nothing, decided that it was time to uncover the truth behind it all. They didn't know what they would find, but they were determined to face whatever awaited inside. As they crossed the rusted gate and stepped onto the abandoned yard, the group had no idea they were about to embark on an experience that would change their lives forever. The house seemed indeed alive, and perhaps, contrary to what everyone had thought, the deepest fears of the town weren't in fabricated stories, but in the very real things that could be found inside. What lies behind a locked door and a broken window might be much more than one could imagine. They were about to find out. The group arrived at the house just as the sun began to set, casting a soft but eerie light on the old facade. The shadows of the trees danced along the house's walls, and the cold wind seemed to cut through the air in a strange way. Each step toward the door amplified the sound of silence, until it seemed as though even nature itself had gone quiet in anticipation of what was about to happen. The sensation that something was wrong was immediate, but like any young adventurer, they ignored their own instincts. They were determined to explore, and so they brushed aside the chills on their spines and the whispers of the wind. After all, who would believe the old tales? With a creak, they pushed open the door, stepping into the house. The air was thick with the smell of mold and aged wood. Each step they took seemed to echo louder than the last, and as they ventured deeper, the hallways stretched before them, leading them to an unknown destination. They didn't yet know what they were looking for, but the mere act of venturing inside already filled them with an odd mix of excitement and fear. The house no longer felt like a simple structure. It felt as though it was watching them. The silence in the house was unnerving. Even with all their senses alert, something seemed to be missing. A sound, a presence. Some of them exchanged nervous glances, but the only noise was the rustling of their clothes and the creaking of the old floorboards beneath their feet. With every turn they made, the atmosphere grew darker and more claustrophobic. It wasn't an empty house. Every piece of creaking wood, every moving shadow seemed to have its own story to tell. What was real? What was simply their minds playing tricks? But as they ventured further, their questions began to fade away, replaced by a darker certainty. There was something in this house, and it wasn't ready to be found. After exploring the main rooms for hours, something peculiar caught Mark's attention. Among a pile of forgotten furniture and dust, a small door was partially hidden. He couldn't help but call the others over. As they approached, the anxiety built up. The door was narrow, made of dark, aged wood, and it seemed almost impossible to notice. Without hesitation, Mark beckoned the group, and they all, without a word, drew closer. The key to the mystery of the house seemed to lie just beyond that threshold. When they opened the door, a cold gust of air hit them, and a musty odor filled the room. Inside, they found a large wooden box in the center, surrounded by cobwebs. The silence was absolute. There were no shadows shifting, no sounds coming from the wind. It was as if time had stopped. When they opened the box, what they saw inside caused everyone to hesitate. It wasn't just a box of old relics. It was something much stranger. There were odd objects inside, shapes that couldn't be described in words. There was also an ancient diary, its pages faded and worn with time. At that moment, things began to change. The air thickened, and a muffled sound began to rise. Whispers, barely audible, seemed to come from within the house. The group froze, their hearts racing as they tried to make sense of what was happening. They didn't know it yet, but something in their minds was trying to warn them. They had crossed a line, and now whatever was lurking inside the house was beginning to reveal itself, and there was no way back. As the minutes passed inside the house, the tension grew among the friends. They were trapped in a distorted reality where the walls seemed to move under the weight of an invisible presence. With every step they took, the sound of their footsteps seemed muffled, as if the house was absorbing all the energy around them. Suddenly, the light from the candles they had lit began to flicker, as if something was trying to communicate with them. It was then that the floor trembled slightly, and all eyes turned to the stairs at the end of the hallway. Something, or someone, was coming. Panic began to spread through the group when, suddenly, the doors of the house slammed shut with a loud crash. No matter how much they tried to push them or open them, they were locked, as if some invisible force was holding them shut. The sound of the doors banging against the walls was clear. The house did not want them to leave. They were trapped inside a nightmare, with a growing feeling that every move they made brought them closer to something that was watching them from the shadows. At this moment, the voices that had once seemed distant began to grow louder. They were not human voices. They were whispers from something ancient and threatening. Some members of the group, overcome by fear, began to run in different directions, trying to find an escape. But soon they realized they were being followed. The shadows seemed to stretch and swallow the hallways, distorting reality around them. It was as if the house had a life of its own, feeding on their fear and anxiety. They were being hunted, and the terror had only just begun. At every corner, the house seemed more labyrinthine and endless. The group tried to scream, but their cries were quickly swallowed by the house's oppression. Mark, the bravest of the group, tried to stay calm, but the others were losing hope. The shadows became thicker, and in each one something moved. "You shouldn't be here," a low, raspy voice echoed through the house. It was impossible to tell where it came from, but everyone knew they were no longer alone. When Mark tried to call the others, he was interrupted by a terrifying sight. A hooded figure appeared at the end of the hallway, staring directly at him with empty eyes. He couldn't move. Panic took over him, and when he finally turned to run, the figure vanished, leaving behind only a shadow that seemed to blend into the wall. The house was no longer just a house. It was a portal to the unknown, and they had crossed the line. Despair began to settle in the group when, without explanation, the doors and windows started opening and closing on their own, as if being controlled by invisible hands. The sound of the hinges creaking echoed through the house, and the shadows began to form, molding into figures of indescribable shapes. It was as if time itself was warping inside the house, as if nothing here was real. What had started as a simple exploration now felt like a fight for survival. The group gathered in one of the few lit rooms, but the shadows were closing in on them. What was outside the room seemed to be growing more threatening, as though something was preparing to devour them. And worst of all, they knew the house wasn't going to let them leave. They were being drawn in, like prey, into a trap they couldn't escape. Every choice they made seemed to pull them deeper into the darkness. The walls began to pulse as if they were breathing. The house was alive, and it was claiming them. At that moment, the group decided to try one last thing, a desperate escape. Mark, with the courage that remained, stepped away from the group, determined to find a way out. But what he found was beyond his understanding. As he reached the front door, he saw the hooded figure again, standing, waiting. There was no room to run. The house didn't want them to leave. It wanted them to stay forever. He screamed for the others, but before he could do anything, the door slammed shut, locking him inside once more. The house was no longer just a house. It was something that went beyond the real, something that should never have been awakened. The following minutes were a whirlwind of chaos and panic. Each of the friends was now in a different part of the house, trying in vain to find each other, but the house was closing in on them, swallowing them into an endless space. The feeling that everything was disintegrating, that reality was being distorted around them, took hold of all of them. There was no more certainty, no more safety. What was here now was only the hunger of something that fed on fear, anxiety, and doubt. However, when they finally reunited, the truth became clear. What was chasing them was not a human being or an ordinary ghost. It was the house itself, cursed with something much deeper and older. The house wasn't just filled with ghosts. It was possessed by something beyond human understanding. They had awoken something that had been sleeping for centuries, something that would never let them leave. They had become part of a story far bigger and older than they had ever imagined. They had become part of the house's secret, and the house would never let them go. As the group tried to comprehend what had happened to them, the air in the house seemed to grow heavier, as if its presence was taking hold of their very souls. The moonlight, which once bathed the place in soft light, now seemed suppressed, as if the house was absorbing the very energy of the world around it. Each of them felt the weight of what had occurred, but at the same time, something kept them there. It was no longer just a house. Now, it was a symbol, a living entity that would not allow its secrets to be uncovered. The house had swallowed them, and with it, part of their souls was trapped there forever. But for the survivors, only one question remained: what to do with the knowledge they had gained. They had uncovered the secret behind the house, but paying that price was higher than anyone could have imagined. The truth, more terrifying than any legend, would follow them for the rest of their lives. Back in the outside world, the friends tried to forget, move on, and live their lives, but the memories of the haunted house never left them. What was once confined within that house now lived in their minds, waiting for the next opportunity to reveal itself, because, as everyone knows, the darkest secrets rarely stay buried forever. The house on the hill would no longer be seen in the same way. The story that once seemed like a mere scary tale had become a horrifying, undeniable truth. Now, for those who dare venture close, it will be impossible to ignore what happened. Like a dark beacon, it remains there, waiting for the brave or naive enough to cross its path. And the question lingers in the air: is there something else inside that house? Something the children failed to see, or had they merely scratched the surface of an even greater mystery? If you were intrigued by this chilling story, make sure to follow the channel and share your thoughts with us in the comments below. What do you think is hiding inside that house? Have you ever encountered something truly terrifying? Let us know, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another mystery like this one. Stay tuned. There's always more to uncover.